Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We'll try one more time. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. That's an awesome welcome. I appreciate that. My name is Greg Brannon from Deer Oak CAP Services. Of course, we're Austin Community College District's Employee Assistance Program. And we're here today to talk about common disciplinary problems and their solutions, also known as effective performance management. Can I start with a story? Okay. Ladies, how many of you in the room know a man that might be a nice man, an encouraging person, but maybe a little forgetful about important events like birthdays, hopefully not anniversaries, Valentine's Day? Okay. This is a story about a guy, see some nods. This is a story about a guy you would have liked to have had as a friend, but he just was forgetful about important events. And so he and a buddy of his from college would get together about once a year, and they would grab some lunch, play around a golf. And over time, his friend was increasingly unhappy at work and would complain about his job, which was starting to take up their whole lunch meeting. And so his buddy said to him, hey, man, he says, back in school, you were so entrepreneurial. If you're really unhappy in your job, why don't you consider going into business for yourself? Well, his friend finally took his buddy's advice, went down to the Small Business Administration, borrowed some money, and opened a franchise of a gift card store in a local mall. We've all been in those stores, right, like a Hallmark? Well, just like his buddy predicted, the man was so successful in his first year in business, he had enough bottom line profit to open a second location in another mall. The morning of the grand opening of the second location came around. His friend who had encouraged him but was forgetful showed up at work, opened his day timer, and says, oh my gosh, I forgot to send my buddy something to congratulate him for the grand opening. So he quickly found a Yellow Pages, called the local florist, said, sir, do you do rush orders? The guy said yes. He ordered a plant, gave the inscription for the card, and gave his credit card number, and he hung up. An hour later, the man from the florist called back in a little bit of a panic. He said, sir, I have to apologize, but because of the rush order this morning, flowers intended to go to a funeral ended up at your friend's grand opening, and the plant that you ordered ended up at the funeral. He says, well, that can't be good. Please tell me, what did the card say on the flowers my friend received? He said, unfortunately, sir, it said our condolences for your loss. The man said, well, that's definitely not the message I was shooting for, but then he went on to say, but I feel really sorry for anyone at that funeral that stops and reads the card on the plant that says, good luck in your new location. All right. This conversation today is an important one, obviously, for anyone that manages people. Let me get sort of a feel for how many folks you guys each individually manage. Who manages more than 5 people? Okay, a bunch. Okay, who manages more than 10 people? Okay. Who manages more than 20 people? Okay. I am not worthy. Okay, that's very good. I appreciate that. Actually, I'm coming to your seminar because you've learned this the hard way. So what we're talking about today, obviously, is very important. It's you know, the whole issue of managing people. A lot of managing people is about how does the process work on an ongoing basis in terms of how you communicate, how you coach them, how you encourage them to perform at the highest level, right? But along with that, discipline is sometimes necessary. You know, how do we deal with those negative behaviors? How do we deal with those times where there's low productivity, where we need to coach and encourage someone to bring it to another level? And so that's what today's conversation is a lot about. So I actually had 2 goals for the next 5 hours. Okay, all right, for the next hour and a half. My first goal is to really help you better understand the difference between managing and coaching. And we're going to talk together and maybe dialogue together about, because they can be different, depending how we define management, they can be different processes. And then the second part of our conversation is going to be practical. We're going to talk about some very practical steps in dealing with dysfunctional behavior, dealing with negative performance, dealing with low productivity, and disciplining those individuals in a supportive way to help them bring their performance up to the level it needs to be. There are lots of practical ways to talk about that. Are there any along those lines, are there any topics you want us to make sure we cover today? Anybody? Susan, I know you're thinking of something.
I understood what you have to say.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm going to try to make this a dialogue. So by the way, folks, anyone familiar with the research on the best time of day to do a presentation? This ain't it. When people are hungry. Okay, so I forgive you for not getting fully engaged yet. So we're going to work together. Let me first start talking about. We can go to the next slide, Monique, please. Actually, I have that, so I can do that. Thank you. We're going to talk about the importance of coaching. Someone define for me the difference between managing and coaching. What's the difference? Anybody? Can I get some help? Pardon me?
I see it sometimes, leading or pushing.
Okay, which part, management or coaching?
To be kind of pushing them along.
Okay.
And just leading and saying, follow me.
Okay, so management would be leading. Okay, coaching would be pushing. Okay, that's interesting. I appreciate that. It's good perspective. What else? Who else could give you some frame of reference? Sir.
I think managing would be more the business part, scheduling, managing lead time, professional development, all of those kinds of things. And coaching is more helping people get to where you want them to be, some kind of support.
Okay. Should I rephrase that so the folks that are with us on the webcast can hear? That was a very good perspective. So this gentleman was talking about, what's your first name, sir?
Joseph.
Joseph was talking about management as sort of being the, is that more the, say that one more time?
Management is more the business end of it, lead time, scheduling, purchasing, budget.
Okay, more the business end of managing people, scheduling, managing the budgets for your department, that kind of stuff. That's a very good perspective. And then coaching would be?
Coaching is more of the interaction with the employee, get them where you want them to be.
Yes.
In a supportive way.
Yes, and that's great. I'm going to your seminar too.
Okay.
And so coaching, I appreciate that. So coaching, and his answer was coaching is going to be more of getting, encouraging, helping an employee get to where they need to be in a supportive way. I think those are really good perspectives on the difference between management and coaching. And some of what we're talking about here is style, isn't it? Because we all have our unique management style. So my goal today is not to change your management style. My goal today is to hopefully open you up to more of the benefits of coaching as a management modality. So I want you to be who you are. I don't want you to go back and think, oh gosh, I've been doing it this way for years and now I need to change. No, you don't need to change that. Keep doing what you do to be successful. But I want you to think a little bit more about coaching as we get into the details of coaching, because coaching is a great way to support and bring people up to another level in a way that they're comfortable with. Most of you probably know that the direct relationship between a first-line supervisor and their employees is pretty important, right? I want you to know just how important it is. Research is real clear. 80% of the reason an individual employee in this country likes or dislikes their job, tells people this is a good place to work or it's not a good place to work, is directly related to how they perceive their boss works with them. So if they've got a supportive boss, they've got someone they feel like is encouraging, coaching, gives them resources, is there for them, is interested more than just what they can do for them, but interested in them as a person. If they feel like they've got that kind of supportive manager or supportive coach, they feel like, wow, I have a great place to work typically. But if they're working for someone who is more of an old school manager, what I mean by old school manager is more of a top-down, I'm the boss, you do what I say, maybe someone that's micromanaging in their approach that pretty much dictates what they ought to do and is less supportive, less interested in getting input from the employees. Can you see how that employee might feel like this place is kind of oppressive? And does that make some sense? Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about coaching, because this is really, really important. And basically, the role of a supervisor, and you guys tell me your perspective on this, the role of a supervisor really is to support employees and help them succeed. Our goal is to help them accomplish their job responsibilities at the highest possible level and to improve their work performance continuously. It's to help them be productive, right? And the first thing I wanted to share is the philosophy, and most of you guys know this, the philosophy of Austin Community College District is, the philosophy is to coach first, it's to support, encourage first before you discipline. And so talking to the Human Resources Department and getting some input from them, I was glad to hear that that's the philosophy of the organization. So the organization really wants their supervisors to be coaches. We want all of you to be those folks that are there in that supportive role, that are working with individuals, making sure that they have all the skills they need to succeed, making sure that they have the resources that they need, and that they're encouraged so they're motivated to perform at high levels. Does that make sense? Okay. Can you see the difference between if you were a micromanager, and I've made some of those mistakes. I've got about 12 years of management experience. I have at times, particularly when I'm stressed and under deadline, I've at times micromanaged people that work for me. And I have seen that it's not comfortable for them, and I don't even like it in the long term. And sometimes you have to. I'm not saying that you always have to coach patiently and never have to get direct, because at times you need to, right? At times you need to step in and make sure the job gets done and get real directive. But in general terms, employees who are coached, who are supported, who are allowed to give input into the process are going to be more comfortable and therefore more motivated. Next thing I want to mention is coaching is actually a preventative way to effectively improve performance without the need for discipline. I want you to see that oftentimes if someone is being coached and supported on a regular basis, because they're more motivated, because that's more of a motivating style of supervision, those individuals are going to tend to be more productive in general because they're being well coached and supported. Which means if they're motivated and productive, that's less reason for us to need to take out the stick. You talk about the carrot and the stick. That's less need for us to take out the stick and try to do corrective discipline. So it's always better. Would you guys agree that you get more with honey than you do with vinegar in general? Not that there's not times to discipline. We're going to talk about that here in a moment. But if you can, in general, have that good, supportive relationship with your employees and keep them motivated, as long as they've got the tools that they need, if they're skilled enough, and that's our job as supervisors too, right? To make sure they've got the tools they need, make sure that they've got the skills, and if they're motivated because they love your management style, 9 times out of 10, it'll never get to a place where you need to discipline because they're going to be performing well. And we have to remember that poor performance oftentimes is a result. It's not a result of, oftentimes poor performance is not the result of someone not wanting to do a good job. It's the result of other situations. Maybe they don't have the skills. Let me introduce a concept to you guys here about performance anxiety. Some of our employees, and they won't tell you this, some of our employees will not come to us and ask for help because a lot of individuals in our culture have some form of performance anxiety. And what I mean by that is it's important to them that they please you. It's important to them that they do well, and they don't want you to think that they don't have the skill or the ability to do it. So they would hesitate to come to you and say, I need help. I can't do this well enough. Because they don't want you to think that you're, that they're less than capable. Would you have any, I see you're nodding. Would you have an example of that?
Here's an example, but,
Do you mind without sharing names?
yeah, I got students for not double, but maybe a third more than I had, and then another duty, which was a stressor for my home team, was I called and asked for help and was given instead of.
Okay. The example from the audience is one of the supervisors in the room I talked about asking for help to their higher ups, and the response from management was more punitive in terms of why don't you have that ability rather than being supportive.
And I was told never to say that you were overwhelmed or that anything that was out of the question to say. And
Okay.
that doesn't mean anything. And if you said that, that doesn't mean anything bad about me.
Right.
I'm letting you know that I've got this, and I can't do all of it without him.
Bless your heart. Yeah, folks, I mean, obviously, we can all resonate with that. When we ask for help, we don't want to be lectured as to why don't you know how to do that, or we don't want to be disciplined for needing help. It should be absolutely fine in a healthy work environment to ask for help. And I know that that's part of the philosophy of human resources here at Austin Community College District is folks, we want to empower, we want managers to empower employees to come forward and ask for help when they need it. That's an important, and it needs to be safe. We need to create a safe environment. Part of coaching and being supportive, like we heard about from the gentleman earlier, is creating a safe environment where your employees can come to you, know that you'll support them, and that you're not going to chastise them or you're not going to think less of them because they're overwhelmed or they need help. Let's face it, how many of you believe that the world is more stressful than ever before? Yeah, folks, obviously we live in a very stressful world nowadays. Most of our employees are going to feel stressed out or overwhelmed at one time or another. So we need to be, as their supervisor, we need to be that safe place they can come to get support. And we want them. We don't want them to not come to us, right? We want to keep that door open. So we need to be that safe place. Okay. And any other questions about about the importance of coaching? Okay. Let's talk about discipline. Before I throw out my definition, give me a working definition of discipline. Anybody?
Corrective action.
A corrective action. Thank you. That's perfect. A corrective action. Yeah, discipline is a corrective action. Let me throw up our little definition. You hit the nail on the head. And most typically, I told you I'm coming to your seminar. Absolutely. And sort of the basis of discipline is around correcting intentional misbehavior. Okay. And so if someone knows what to do, they understand the expectations, and they're choosing not to, that's the most common time to need to discipline. Is you've explained it, they're trained, they know what to do, but they just are not doing it, or they're not doing enough of it, they're not being as productive as their position requires. That oftentimes does require, some disciplinary action. But again, I want to talk about this in the context of coaching. Help me with this for a minute. Let's brainstorm. If you're coaching folks instead of being sort of a micromanager, so if you're being a coach, so if your job is to support, think about that. And you notice one of your employees is not performing up to the level they should. Let's say they're only performing they're only about half as productive as you need them to be. If you're a coach in your relationship with that employee, can you see how just bringing them in and coaching them? So, I've noticed we've talked about we need it to be here, but it's here. Can we brainstorm are there some support that I can provide for you, some resources I can provide for you to help you get it to where it needs to be? Can you see that even the coaching process can help it can help the situation becoming a negative disciplinary process in the eyes of the employee? Does that make sense? Okay. So I even want you to think about discipline in the context of coaching. And again, not to say that there's not sometimes you're going to have to call someone to task. There are going to be. People are human. People cross lines sometimes, and we're going to get into specific examples of how to deal with that when that does happen. But I'm a big believer, again, that 9 times out of 10, if you're coaching your employees, if you're communicating regularly, you're encouraging them, you're supporting them, you can have those coaching conversations along the way to bring performance back to where it needs to be, and it never has to get to a point where it's more of a punitive discipline. If that makes sense. Question? Okay. Is it just me, or can anyone else feel the love in this room right now? I know you feel it. I feel it. Monique, you feel it? Okay. All right. Now let's talk about when discipline becomes necessary. So let's say you've coached people, okay? You've coached your employee, you've encouraged them, you've had multiple conversations, you've made sure they've got the training that they need, that they do clearly understand what's going on, and they're still not performing. So now discipline's becoming necessary, okay? So more formal disciplinary steps now need to take place. So first of all, again, that should happen when someone clearly understands what's expected and is just not doing it. Okay? They have all the resources, you've had multiple conversations, you know they've got the skill, and they're just not making it happen. What would be an example, guys, of a situation where you've had multiple conversations with someone and they're just not making it happen? Anybody? So that's a great example. The example from the audience was when someone continues to come in late and they know and they've been talked to that they're supposed to be there at a particular time. That's a great example. And after multiple conversations, it does get to the point where you need to start thinking about formal discipline. You're exactly right. But here's the second category. Discipline can also be used to eliminate more dysfunctional employee behaviors that are getting in the way of productivity. A couple of examples I wanted to make is one would be inappropriate communication. A good example of inappropriate communication is if a particular individual is rude to their coworkers. Can anyone picture someone in your mind's eye that sends really terse emails or just isn't nice? Okay. And so that's obviously an area that needs to, after coaching, after trying to help that individual understand expectations, or maybe even try to get them some communication skills training, if they continue to be abrasive or rude to their coworkers, at that point in time, you need to think about some sort of a formal disciplinary process for that. Would you agree? Okay. Give me another example of when discipline would be appropriate for a dysfunctional employee behavior? I know you could probably write a book on it with all your, with the size of your staff.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I have is, I have to go training people how to communicate.
Okay.
And additionally, people are set in their ways about how they communicate because they have a lot of experience. And they don't understand the book as well as they should. End up with poor outcomes when they don't follow policy.
Okay.
So we have a lot of conversations about how to do that.
Okay.
That's a common one that we have.
That's a great example. So the comment or the example was with staff, because the fact that this is an educational institution, there are students, that coaching staff around how to communicate effectively with students, and if that isn't happening, how that does need to be corrected. Because of course the mission of the organization is to educate our students. And so if communication isn't happening and it's getting in the way of the educational experience, it needs to be corrected. That's a great example. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had an employee over here. We bring up safety issues. But while they had some journal to inappropriately communicate them from the school,
Okay.
create chaos in that environment. And he was directed to bring those in first, so we could bring more resources to bear on the problems. He just failed to do that.
Okay, so the example was an employee that would bring up inappropriate content. Was that in front of the students?
Other staff.
In front of other staff members, and after being coached and being disciplined, that employee eventually had to be terminated for those things. Okay, we may come back and visit that as a case study if you don't mind here in a minute. That's a very interesting case study. Okay. Now let's talk about common categories of disciplinary problems. And when I talk about problem, what Austin Community College District, how HR and how the organization looks at problems is they don't want you focusing on one-off kinds of things because we're all human. We want to look for patterns. Okay, we shouldn't be thinking about disciplining unless it's a serious offense. We shouldn't be thinking about disciplining a one-time thing. Can you guys relate? We're all human. We all make mistakes. Yeah, you might have to talk to someone and coach them a little bit because they made a mistake or said something out of school or whatever. But what we're looking for really here is patterns. We shouldn't be thinking formal discipline unless there's a pattern of behavior. Let me give you some examples. First, problems of attendance. We had the one this young woman asked, or made a very, very good example about someone that had been coached about coming to work on time and yet continued to come in late. That's a pattern. If that's happening multiple times, that's a pattern. I mean, how do you guys feel about giving people a couple of chances before a couple of coaching conversations before you start thinking formal discipline? You feel pretty good about that? Okay. And I think it depends on the person, right? I mean, I wouldn't be hard and fast about that. I'd say a couple might be, if you've got someone you know is workable, they're overwhelmed, and you talk to them, you know they've got a good attitude, and they're just sort of taking them a little bit of time to get it, yeah, I'd give them that extra chance or two. But if you know someone's closed and you've coached them and they're not being respectful, they're not being open, yeah, you might, after the second warning, you might start talking about formal discipline. So you got to use sometimes management is as much an art as it is a science, right? You got to use your best judgment there. Okay, next is problems of poor performance. This to me is the most difficult area because there's a lot of subjectivity in productivity, isn't there? It's like you may say, I want you to be doing your job at this level, and the employee may think, but I am doing it at that level. And your definition of productivity, high productivity, and theirs might be a little different. So this is a little bit harder. But what I'm talking about in terms of productivity really is, are they succeeding in the job? Are they generating enough of a workflow or enough of enough successful performance in their job objectives that's in a way that's satisfying to you and to the organization? And we're going to have to be real clear about that. That's why coaching to me around productivity is the most important modality. It's a lot easier to be a little bit more a little bit more black and white about about policy violations. You know what I mean? But when you're talking about getting someone to day-to-day be motivated to be engaged in their work, to do it at the highest possible level, to have the best, performance, that's a little bit more, takes a little bit more finesse on the manager's part. If that makes sense. And so this is a more difficult situation. But I want you to remember that a coach. Let me give you this sort of sports analogy. Anybody here like sports? Anybody here a Dallas Cowboys fan? Okay. This right here is the biggest Dallas Cowboys fan in the room. Anybody a Texas Longhorn fan? Okay, better get some hands. Okay. So using the sports analogy, coaching is communicating and coaching is educating. At its core, coaching is good communication. It's the ability to talk to someone in a way that's motivating to them so that they'll be motivated to do something with the content of the conversation. And it's educating them. It's continually providing them the information that they need to be successful. It's helping encourage them to increase their skills. So, okay. And so this really is coaching is most important. You can get away with maybe just managing and dealing with policy violations and those kinds of things. But if you really want to have a high-performing department, you really need to seriously consider being the best possible coach, the most supportive, the most encouraging. Because how many of you believe that performance at its core has to come from the individual? How many of you believe that? Okay. So it's intrinsic, which means think of every person on your team as a ball of potential. And your job as a supervisor is to create an environment and provide the support and resources and encouragement so that that potential grows to what it really can be. Does that make some sense? Yes, sir.
It is possible, though, that the manager training.
Yeah, that's true, and we need to take responsibility. The comment in the room is that it is possible the manager didn't give that individual the tools and the training that they need to succeed. That's absolutely true.
And I think before somebody resorts to discipline with the person, they have to look inward, ask themselves, have I done everything I can to make this person?
I'm coming to your seminar too. That is 100% correct. I mean, that's a great definition of coaching. Is that every manager, before we get to a point of discipline, and that's the philosophy of the college. Okay, is before we get to discipline, we need to look inside, make sure that we as supervisors have we given them all the tools they need to be successful. Have we given them the training? Do they have the ability? Have we supported them enough so that they're motivated? Yeah, we do. I agree. I totally agree. That's what this is all about. If you can do that on a regular basis. Again, 9 times out of 10, your employees will respond pretty well. You won't have to get to a place of punitive discipline. That's wonderful. Thank you. And then, of course, we get misconduct. Now, misconduct, of course, for most of us, probably when we think discipline, we probably connect it to policy violations or misconduct. With misconduct, it's an easier conversation, right? Because now you still, if you're coaching, if you're being a good coach, and folks understand what the expectations are, and they understand what the policies are, that also is going to minimize misconduct. But sometimes people cross lines, we know that, and in that case, it's an easier conversation because if it's a clear boundary violation like theft of organizational property or being caught abusing substances because we have a drug-free workplace, that's a different conversation, and we're going to talk about how to handle those things in a minute, because some of those conversations need to go directly into the disciplinary process just because of the nature of the danger of those behaviors. Would you guys agree? Okay. Any other questions or ideas about common categories of things that we have to discipline as supervisors? Yes, sir.
I think it's possible that I was thinking when you're talking about coaching, I've seen managers that coaching to them is the first step of the disciplinary scale. Yeah. And so they think, all right, I'm going to start with coaching, then I'm going to start ratcheting it up. Yeah. And they don't look at coaching. It's really what it is you're trying to motivate this person to be successful. Yeah. And they look at it, that's the first thing to get them to sign off for, so I can go to the next step. Yeah. That's a great nuance you picked up on, sir. I love that. It's John, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, John had a really, really good point. He said for some managers, they don't see coaching as a day-to-day
management strategy to really get the most out of your employees and provide the best environment for your employees. They see coaching as a disciplinary step. And I don't want you to see coaching as a disciplinary step. That's a great catch, John. What we want to do is we want to be coaches day to day so that our employees get the most possible support, they get the best resources, and they're able to be motivated to be successful, and that ball of potential can come to its fruition. You know what I mean? We don't want to wait to coach until we're in a place of low productivity or misconduct. That's a great, great point. Thank you. Okay. Let's talk about other problem behaviors. Most of the rest of the conversation we're going to have today, I've got a couple of precursors here about dealing with employees who are upset. So that takes a little bit of skill, right, and some good, some good interpersonal ability on your part to be able to work with folks that are upset, because that's always hard. But we're going to spend a lot of time today getting into specific problem behaviors and performance issues that do require discipline. Okay. Let me give you one more precursor. So let's say right now we're all on the same page. We are good coaches. All of us in this room are coaches. We are committed to being the most supportive supervisors we can be, to encouraging our employees, to being there for them, creating a safe environment where they can come to us to get support when they need it, making sure they have all the skills and tools and resources they need to be successful, okay? And yet there's still an issue. Let's say there's still a performance issue, maybe a lack of productivity in one particular area, or there's some sort of a policy violation, even though they've been talked to a couple of times. Let's take if we can come back to your example about the person who's excessively tardy or repetitively tardy. It's really important before we do jump to conclusions. Has anyone heard that term that it's better exercise to dig for facts than jump to conclusions? Is that cute? Okay. Because we want to make sure before we just get into the issue, we want to make sure that we're looking holistically at what's going on in that employee's life. Because sometimes there's complications, right? Sometimes there's a lot of stress in that employee's life. Right? There's some stuff going on where the employee is overwhelmed and they're just not able to, let's say a daycare situation went south and it's the summertime and the kids are out of school. That mom is pulling her hair out trying to get 3 kids to different places and is repeatedly late, in the month of July. If you weren't thinking about that as a supervisor or, really kind of exploring that, we might start to discipline that behavior without recognizing this is an employee that really does need more support and resources. And so, just as an example, naturally you guys would probably look into that. What would be some other examples of out of the ordinary stressors that might cause an employee to act out or to be less productive than they typically would be? That would be important for us to at least be aware of. Susan?
Spouse lost a job recently.
Okay.
Financial problems.
Yeah, spouse lost a job and they're going through financial problems. You guys, yeah, financial stress is really, really hard. It's one of the top stressors in an individual's life. It's really hard to think clearly and be productive when you're under severe financial stress. Yes. Yes. Yeah, we're going to do that for sure. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Right. You're right. Yeah, there might be some folks. One of the most common, and don't jump to conclusions. We're going to talk about dealing with substance abuse, drug and alcohol abuse here in a little bit. So we don't want to jump to conclusions necessarily all the time. But one of the, if you look at the literature on behavior when someone starts using drugs, for example, you see some pretty significant personality changes. People start acting different. And performance at work suffers. And so you will see a drop-off in performance, less reliability, you'll see changes. And so it's really important that we just don't discipline the behavior without looking at the whole person and giving them the benefit of the doubt and also giving yourself the ability to see what else can I do to support this person. This person might need, and that's where the EAP can come in. If this person is dealing with substance abuse issues, the EAP can be a help. Maybe at that point it would be more helpful, at least as part of the process, to direct that person to get some help instead of just disciplining the behavior. Can you see that if someone has an underlying situation like drug abuse, that just disciplining, easy for me to say, you know what I mean? Thank you. Disciplining The behavior at work is just putting a Band-Aid on the core problem. The core problem isn't that behavior at work. That's sort of like the acting out. That's the tip of the iceberg. The problem is this person has a drug problem. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about this. Medical conditions. Let's talk about medical conditions. So if individuals have medical conditions, if they're sick, if they're caring for a sick relative, there are certain rights. Family Medical Leave Act, ADA. There's certain legal rights that people have when they're dealing with illness. So you really, as a supervisor, need to assess, do an assessment. What's going on? Know your employees well enough. And if you're a coach, this is another. I'm probably like a salesman for coaching, right? I love coaching as a modality. If you're a coach in your management style and you're communicating regularly with your employees and you're supportive and you're sensitive to them, hopefully you should know what's going on in their lives. With most of them, some people are pretty close, but most of your employees will tell you, right? If they feel like you're open up, isn't that true? They'll tell you what's going on in their life. And so you definitely want to be aware. And of course, now if there is an underlying medical condition that you think might be affecting the performance, I would definitely talk to human resources, because people that are dealing with illness do have rights. So you want to make sure we're not violating anybody's rights. So we want to get some coaching from HR. And they'll at least give you some things to consider. So you do want to be careful and look into those things. Emotional issues, folks. I think emotional issues are really under-focused on in the workplace. Because we live in such a stressful world, a lot of folks are dealing with fear, anxiety, anger. There's a lot of stuff going on in people's life nowadays, and it impacts their job performance. It really does. That performance anxiety, I appreciated your honesty, man. That performance anxiety that people have, a lot of people, walk around at work, they're afraid to disappoint the supervisor. They're afraid to let folks know that they need help. They're dealing with some fear. That's something that needs to be addressed if possible. And if you're a coach, hopefully you'll get some of that out of people. Like, I'd even be honest with someone. Once you know they're comfortable with you, I'd be honest with them and say, are you feeling like you can't be honest with me that you don't have, enough experience in this area? Are you feeling like, and if they say, to be honest, I really am, and I was afraid to ask for help because I don't want you to think I can't do my job. I would love to have more of those conversations with people. Get it out in the open. If you know someone's a worrier and they're constantly worried, they're a perfectionist, that's another issue with employees. We can coach them around. You can come over, put your hand on someone's shoulder or hand on their desk and look at them and say, you know what, the report you turned in, it was fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. And you can really relieve someone's burden because you can tell those that are really hard on themselves, really overly conscientious, wanting to be perfect. You can relieve their burden by just letting them know, it's fine. The report you did was fine. I was very happy with it. And when they make a mistake and you see them beating themselves up, you can walk over to them and say, I don't expect you to be perfect. I screw up every day. We're all human. And it's just being real with people. Would you agree with is real helpful? Okay. Any other thoughts about things we should be assessing for? Some underlying issues that could be impacting employees' performance or behavior?
I think that you're right. Emotional issues, you don't really know what's going on in your employees' lives. I noticed one of my employees was atypically, things kind of jointed, and went over to talk to him and goes, I really need to talk to you. So I invited him in, and the night before he'd witnessed 2 people be hit by a car.
Oh my gosh!
And but he was such a trooper about coming in, and he was that kind of an employee that it never dawned on him that he could take the day off,
right,
and just reassess things, and I put that experience in perspective.
That's a great point. That's a great example. Do you think folks on the webcast are able to hear those comments? They can't. The comment that was made from one of the supervisors in the audience was there was an employee that had witnessed a car accident, a tragic car accident, and was really shaken up by it, but was a real trooper and came to work the next day anyway. And certainly that experience, that trauma, was going to impact their performance that next day. And that employee didn't even realize that they could have called in sick that day. That experiencing that a trauma is a legitimate reason to use one of your sick days. There's no question. And let me bring up the EAP guys. We have a management consulting part of the EAP that some of you may not know a whole lot about. You have unlimited management consultations, and so you call the 800 number for the EAP, and we're going to put it up on the screen again at the end. And if you have a situation and you're not exactly sure how to handle it, and it's like complicated, like my employee is going through this situation and I want to support him, but I'm not sure what to say, rather than saying nothing, right? And a lot of times we don't talk to the employees because we're not sure how to approach it, right? Call the EAP management consultant, the consultant line, and just say, can I talk to one of the management consultants? And here's the situation. They will give you coaching. Or call human resources. Don't be afraid that HR is going to look down on you because you don't know how to handle that situation. That's not a slight on you as a supervisor. I think it's wise to ask for help. Wouldn't you agree that in most cases it's wise to ask for help? Absolutely. And the management consultant line is confidential. So if you do feel like you'd rather get some objective, confidential advice on an unlimited basis, you can call the EAP and get some help along those lines. Okay. All right, let's talk about the formal disciplinary process, just so we're all square on what the steps are. And these are the steps for Austin Community College District. This is straight out of your employee handbook, the personnel policy manual. Okay, is that it starts with a verbal warning. Now, if you're a coach again, okay, if you're coaching, a lot of you're doing a lot of that verbally. And again, I'll hold up at 90% of the time. If you're coaching, talking actively with someone about their performance, giving them feedback, offering support, offering resources, it probably never gets to a place of a formal verbal warning because you're coaching the whole time. You're constantly communicating, you're helping. But if it gets to a place where you've done all that and that employee is still coming in late, there's nothing really out of the ordinary. They're just obviously not compliant. And don't want to be compliant, or just don't manage their time well enough, or whatever the case may be, and you got to call them in and say, this is a formal verbal warning. That this is, I mean, we've talked about this, several times. You've agreed that you need to be here by 9 o'clock, and yet you continue to come in. This is the 6th time this month. You've been in, 9:15, 9:30, and we can't run a department like that. And so I've got to put you on notice. This is a formal verbal warning. And if we don't correct this behavior, there could be further disciplinary action that could be up to and including termination. And I would tell them as a supervisor, I don't want it to get to that point. I want us to be able to deal with this and correct it at this level. And ask them again, is there anything else I can do to help you? Are there any other resources you need to be able to get to work on time? Is there anything else going on that's keeping you from getting here that I could help you with? And sometimes maybe it's a change of schedule. I'm not saying that you always fix the problem by changing it, but I mean, there's some out of the ordinary things that happen we need to be open about. If there's possibility within your department, and it may not be possible. It may not be possible to make that kind of a change, but be thinking creatively, because we want to fix it. You guys are probably pretty familiar with the high replacement costs of bringing in a new employee. It costs the organization a ton of money to let someone go and bring in a replacement. It really does. You might think that let's just fix it by bringing in someone new, but it costs the organization not only in lost productivity, then there's a gap in time where that person's gone. Recruiting costs are real high nowadays. It's really expensive. And then you've got the job of training that person, which is going to lower your other productivity while you're focused on training that new person. It's always best to bloom where you're planted. Would you agree? Always best to try to fix the situation with the current staff, if at all possible. And sometimes it's not possible, but it's always best to try to address it. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. I would. I mean, you can talk to human resources for the exact structure at ACCD. I personally would. I would have the verbal conversation followed up with a minimum an email. Just saying, as we discussed, boom, 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 boom. And you may also want to have them sign it. So I mean, that would be, I think with verbal, that would be up to the policy of the college and up to your personal preference. If the college wants verbal warning signed, then of course you're going to have to. So we would definitely want to talk with Dr. Tucker and HR about that. But for me, just managing people, I would at the very least do a turnaround email just so you've got a paper trail. And you have a documentation that we did have this conversation? No question. Okay. All right, next would be a written warning. Now it gets more serious. Now I've coached you. We've had many conversations. We had the formal verbal conversation where I warned them that if this doesn't get fixed, now there's going to be further disciplinary action. And the next week, they come in again at 9:15. Now you got to watch. You got to manage your own emotion around this, guys, because as supervisors, there's a tendency to take it personal when you are. You know what I'm saying? Well, how many of you guys have kids? Okay. How many of you guys have ever been kids? Is anybody still a kid? Come on, I know there's some out there. Okay. You know, as parents, when you coach your children, when you instruct your children, and they continue to not do it or rebel against you, it angers you, doesn't it? It angers me. I guess it's like I take it personally a little bit. Like, come on. I mean, do you not respect me enough that you would follow my lead or follow my direction? And what I want to share with you guys, when it gets to this level, detach emotionally. Don't take it personally. It's not you. Okay? For some employees, they have, if you notice that some employees have, and we're going to talk a little bit more about dealing with emotional employees here in a moment, some employees have authority issues. Have you noticed? Yeah. So it's true that people bring their baggage to work with them. So if they had an overbearing dad or an overbearing mom and they come to work, you know, they just buck against most authority, that's an issue of theirs that it's not up to you to solve. That's something they brought to the workplace. Your job is not to reparent them. Your job is to supervise them and coach them. And so, but I just want you to be aware that some of those dynamics are in place. So some people that are passive with you, which I'll talk more about in a minute, or just rebel against your directive, some of that is their own stuff. That's just stuff that they bring to the workplace. It's baggage. It's dysfunctional ways of interacting with authority that they need to fix on their own time. Your job is their supervisor, not their therapist. So we need to manage the behavior and not the person in this situation. So part of that is you need to detach. Don't take it personally. Okay, don't let their rebelliousness against your directives to make you feel like this is a personal thing. No, I'm going to get you to obey. You can't force anyone to follow the rules. I mean, it's intrinsic. Performance is intrinsic. Someone has to make the decision. I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to follow your direction. And we can coach, we can encourage, and then we can discipline. But at the end of the day, like in the example that our friend in the back of the room, what's your first name again, sir? Joseph. What Joseph in the back of the room shared earlier, at the end of the day, you can coach, you can encourage, you can discipline, but that employee has to make the decision to comply. At some point in time, we get to the bottom of this, and in this process here, after written warning, they go on probation. They go on a formal written probation, which gets signed, I believe, and everything else. And next, there's suspension without pay. And then finally, if none of that works, then there's the possibility of termination of the employee's performance, of their position, of their employment. And so we hope it doesn't get to that point. What I love about the way ACCD does things, this is a very fair, patient process. This is giving people every chance to turn it around. Don't you agree? Very fair. And if you're a big coach, a lot of stuff happens, a lot of chances happen up here before it even gets into this process. Questions about this? You guys are pretty familiar with this, right? Okay, supervisors? Okay. So I have to say, right, exactly. Okay. Now remember that it's important that we're consistent, we're fair. So remember when you're managing multiple people that how you handle one person gets seen by other people. So let's say you coach one person about a particular performance issue endlessly. You've got them in your office every other week. You're talking to them. Then you get another person and you have a conversation or two with them, and then they get a verbal warning. That person B could say, wait a second, that's not fair. Why did I get something in writing about this when the other person also wasn't doing it and they just got talked to? So you got to remember that as a supervisor, you need to be consistent across how you discipline all of your employees. And we're human beings too, right? So sometimes there's the tendency to be a little harder on those that are not as compliant. But you need to remember that we need to be fair and consistent, at least to the extent possible. Guys, use each other as sounding boards. If it's getting too personal, pull a supervisor aside or talk to human resources, or again, call the EAP, talk to a management consultant, and get some advice. Say, this employee is really pushing my buttons, and I don't want to be too hard on them, and I need a little bit of objectivity. Here's what's going on. Give me some thoughts about how I should approach this. A lot of times it's getting, like with insubordination, you're going to see in a slide that's coming up here in a minute. With insubordination, we recommend, because insubordination, which is a direct disrespect to you or direct disobedience to your directive, okay, that pushes people's buttons and it causes us to be angry as supervisors. So we always recommend, in the case of insubordination, that you call in some other supervisors for objectivity or call the AP management consultant line. Because we don't want you to we don't want you to react emotionally to that situation. We want you to take a step back and look at it rationally without emotion. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, here's some additional tips for effective discipline. We've covered some of it already. So number one, you need to have some immediacy, behavior modification. So the conversation needs to happen, whether it be a coaching conversation or a disciplinary conversation, as close to the issue or misbehavior as possible, so the person connects it to, this is happening, I did this yesterday and I'm being talked to today. Okay? If you let a week go by or 2 weeks go by and then you call them in, they can take it personally. They can think, no, wait a second, you just don't like me. Okay? But if you want to deal with it as quickly as you can to the offense. And behavior modification, I mean, it's just, and again, stay focused on the behavior, not on the person. When you did that yesterday, we had talked about it before several times. You had agreed that you understood the expectation, and yet you were late again yesterday. And I'm telling we can't have that anymore. It's really disruptive to the department, and I've got to give you a formal verbal warning. Okay. And stay focused on that. Don't talk about the employee. Don't talk about the employee never and always. Guys, this is maddening to employees, and it makes it personal between them and you. You don't want that. You want it clear and objective. So, for example, don't call someone in and say you are always late. Okay, that's not true. Isn't that true? Some days they are on time, so it's not okay. Or you're never on time. You know what I'm saying? Focus on the specific behavior discipline. Focus on the 11th, 12th, and 17th, you got in more than 15 minutes late. And like I told you, I'll give you some grace because there's traffic and other things, and I know you got daycare issues in the morning. But like we discussed, I can't give you more than 15 minutes grace, and we had agreed that you would comply with that, and now you've been late again. So we're going to have to address that formally now. So very, very specific, focused on the behavior, not on the person. And again, make sure that you've had enough coaching conversations so that the person's not surprised. Has anyone ever had the experience, and you don't have to raise your hand, because I've had it as a manager. Has anyone ever had the experience where you brought someone in, they were shocked that you were talking to them about what you were talking to them about? Okay, but if we're doing our job right as supervisors in coaching and educating and communicating regularly, formal discipline following this process should not be a surprise. It should be a continuation of the dialogue. We've coached, we've talked 3 or 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, and it's still not working. Now we're going to have to get more formal. So it shouldn't be a surprise. Then, of course, we talked about consistency. Questions? Okay. I want to let you guys know that food is coming in 34 minutes. The reason I'm telling you that is psychologists say we can get you anything if we know when the end is. So you will be done in 34 minutes. I appreciate Monique's smiles because you've heard all these like a couple times. So. Okay. All right, let's talk about the last prerequisite before we get into disciplining specific areas of misconduct. Let's talk about interacting with emotional employees. This is really, really hard, isn't it? This is hard. This is why managers get paid the salaries that we get paid. And so, okay. Well, this is why managers typically make. And I won't get into income. Okay. But this is part of the challenge of management. This is why a lot of people don't go into management. Okay, because it's really hard to deal with people that are difficult. It's hard. Have you ever noticed that sometimes people get promoted because they're the best technically in their area and they get promoted to manager, but they don't have a lot of experience in dealing with people. They don't have the management skills. And so yeah, so this really is the art of management, is dealing with difficult, challenging employees. And so just remember, anytime you're talking about someone's performance, right? Anytime you're talking about someone's livelihood, and disciplining an employee in their eyes is potentially threatening their livelihood, as they see discipline could end in maybe losing their job. And so, you guys remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay. The very bottom of the hierarchy is safety and security needs. Our base need as a human being and as an employee is to feel safe at work. Feel like I've got some job security. I've got some support from my boss. I'm not going to lose my job tomorrow. I'm going to be able to pay my bills. And so when you call an employee in, I just want you to know the volatility of this emotionally in an employee's mind. Even if they don't talk about it, it's in the back of their mind. When you call someone in and say, we've got to have a serious conversation here, that pushes buttons. That brings fear into their hearts. That's going to create an emotional reaction. Now, folks, a lot of times people who are afraid respond in anger. Anger, by the way, is a secondary emotion. I want you to know that. Sadness, fear, anxiety, those are core emotions. Grief, those are core emotions. Anger is a secondary emotion. Anger is a response to something else. So when someone hits you in the arm, it's like, ow, I'm mad. The ow is what starts the mad, right? Someone disrespects you, it's like, that hurts my feelings. That makes me feel disrespected. I'm angry about that. So I want you to recognize that when you got an angry person sitting in front of you who's now being even more disrespectful because they're like totally offended that you're having a serious disciplinary conversation with them. I don't want you to get just be out of sorts like, why is this happening? I want you to see it as grist for the mill. It's normal when someone feels threatened and someone's disciplined to respond in either being really emotional, crying, being scared, being mad, pushing back. It's pretty normal. So as a supervisor, again, we want you to be in a really, really good place. Let me explain why it's crucial. 101, skill 101 for dealing with emotional employees is to pick the right time and place. Make sure you're ready and make sure they're ready. So if you're in a bad place, guys, don't do it. You've had a rough day, it's 4 o'clock, don't do it. By the way, I wouldn't have disciplinary conversations at the end of the day if possible. Because what happens when you say to an employee at 5 to 5, come into my office before you leave? They're thinking they're getting fired. Okay? I mean, I would pick another time during the day. Now, I understand if you get to the bottom of that last stage of discipline and you're actually going to terminate the employee, I understand that oftentimes that happens at the end of the day. Not here? Is it in the morning? Okay. Okay, so this culture, it happens in the morning. Okay, and that's good. But I wouldn't have, just because I don't want to scare the employee half to death, I don't want to tell them, see me before you leave. You know what I mean? I don't want to scare them. I want to be aware of their emotions and their feelings. So make sure you're in a good place. If you've had a rough day, if you're feeling emotional, if you've got stuff going on in your own life, sleep on it. Take a step back, talk tomorrow. Okay? Make sure you're in a good place. If you recognize the employee's in a bad place, sleep on it, talk tomorrow. Very few situations, unless it's a safety issue, which we'll talk about here in a minute, or one of the worst violations, unless it's one of those things. Come on in, sir. Yeah, go on the other side. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to really lose you because we're all going to be looking at the food. But make sure that both of you are in the right place. And so it's never bad to wait overnight. You remember the old wives' advice of sleep on it, count to 10?
What if you have that situation where that employee is never going to be in the right place?
Yeah, that's a good point. Then you at least make sure you're in a good place. Okay? Make sure you're in a good place. Yes?
I just share. I had a really difficult evaluation with an employee.
Yeah.
And that he was not the one here. I turned it around my truck.
Okay.
So we got to a place where we could be alone. We were both kind of okay. And it actually worked out really well. I had done it in my office.
That's great advice. The gentleman suggested that he actually waited. He carried the documentation around in his truck for a week. Finally got to a place where they were both out on the road and it was comfortable and they had the conversation and it went well. He felt like had he had the conversation in his office back at work, that may not have gone well at all. So you're right. That's great advice about right time, right place. At the very least, make sure you're in the right place. There's a book I want to recommend to you guys. It's a great book. If you're someone like me who only reads like pieces of things, I'm a Cliff Notes guy waiting to happen. It's called Difficult Conversations. Carrie Patterson is the author. I'm sorry, forgive me. It's Crucial Conversations. Forgive me. Same meaning though. Crucial Conversations. Carrie Patterson. I would just, if you're like me, it's a great book. But if you're like me, I read the foreword in chapter 1, and I got the whole concept. And this is what I'm sharing with you here. The whole concept is we need to understand the dynamics of difficult conversations or crucial conversations. The dynamics are whenever we're talking about something really energized, where the stakes are high. In a disciplinary conversation, the stakes are high. The person feels threatened. They're afraid for their job. You're frustrated because you've been working with that person and they're still not complying. And we're trying to see it's a perfect storm for discomfort. And guess what happens, folks, during those times? Everyone familiar with the fight or flight response? At the very time you need to be calm, your body's fight or flight response goes into gear. You're sending, your heartbeat is going faster, so your blood pressure is raised, you're emotional, you've got adrenaline and cortisol being released from the fight or flight response in your bloodstream, so you really are jacked up naturally. And so it's real hard to stay calm when you're in a fight or flight mode. And so that's why I try to make sure I'm in a good place. I take a step back, I say a prayer, I make sure that I'm good and that I'm as objective as possible to sit down so that when if the employee does react badly, I'll be able to stay calm. So, okay, first of all, make sure it's the right time and place. And then, of course, thoughtfully respond. So if at least you're in a good place, you want to always respond and not react to the employee's emotions. The worst thing that can happen during a disciplinary conversation is they throw a dart at you, you throw a dart back. And this has helped me be a better parent, by the way. Okay, as I've practiced this, as a parent over the years. I used to get pretty emotional, especially when my daughter was a teenager. Disrespect. Susan, do you have teenagers? Okay, how many?
Well, they're now adults.
Okay, do you remember those years? Yeah, teenagers push buttons, and so guess what I did, even though I've got counseling training, guess what I did for like 2 years during 15, 16? I brought myself to her level. So at the dinner table, she'd do this, and I'd do that back. And I got training. Finally, my wife pulled me aside and gave me an intervention, which I needed. My wife coached me. She said, you know what, honey, if you want respect, you got to give respect. So she really got me thinking, and I teach this stuff, so she got me thinking, you need to practice what you preach in the home, too, not just with adults. So I started being more thoughtful and prayerful and less reactive with my own daughter. And guess what? I got better results. There's no question. And so you want to make sure you're not reactive, that you're responding. And you know what? You don't always have to respond at that moment. Let's say you call the person in, you present the situation, and they go off on you. Okay? They get really insubordinate. Okay? You don't have to address that right then. You can actually say, well, you know what? I can tell you're really upset. I need to think about this a little bit more. Let's go ahead and end the meeting for now, and I need to think about this, and we'll get back together tomorrow. And hopefully we can have a calmer conversation at that point. Break it up. Okay, take a step back, then you can get some help. You can call our management consultation line. You can go talk to HR. You can talk to each other. You can get some coaching and support. Okay, and then that person will calm down. Remember that the rule of escalation it's almost like the opposite of the law of physics, that the body in motion stays in motion. The first law of physics, right, is the body in motion stays in motion. The law of de-escalation is the body in response mode brings the other person down to you. And so you can actually, by staying calm, they will start to come down to you. I love the saying, a gentle answer, how do you say that? Yeah, a gentle answer turns away wrath. I love that saying. I love it. And it's true. If they get escalated and you're very calm going, no, I understand you're upset, but we'll get through this. It's gonna be okay. Okay? And that will bring them down to you. So you definitely want to be a responsive person, not a reactive person. And again, like we talked about, if the employee's too emotional, there's no problem taking a step back. I mean, a lot of times people feel like just because I'm in it, I got to fix it now. I got to end it. You don't have to. Remember, you're the supervisor. Then one of the The benefits of being a supervisor is you get to call the schedule. So if this isn't working out, take a step back. Okay? Remember some of the best of the generals in history, in U.S. war history, they would do strategic retreats. And a retreat is, if it's for a wise reason, is not a bad thing. It's not a sign of weakness. Take a step back. And then my favorite communication skill comes right out of Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Use this whenever you're dealing with an emotional employee. And that's seek first to understand, then be understood. Which means if they're upset, let them talk. Find out how they're feeling, what they're thinking about the situation before you continue to kind of say what you want to say and roll out the warning and do all that stuff. Let them get it out. Let them go first. It always works best. They'll at the very least feel heard. They won't see you as someone that's just dictating to them or just scolding them. Okay. Questions? I'll tell one more story, then we'll end with some of the specific examples. Can I see my police story? Can you see my police story? Okay. I love to see if John likes the story. Okay, this is a story about a young police officer who just graduated from the police academy. And as a matter of fact, like most of us, when we're in a new job, anxious to impress our new boss, right? So the young police officer goes to his first pre-patrol meeting in his new precinct, and he sits down. The sergeant comes in and says, "Today, folks, I want you to write tickets for people not wearing seatbelts." And so the young police officer, they break up the meeting. He jogs out to his patrol car, drives as fast as he can to the first busy intersection he can find, and he waits. And about, 5 minutes goes by, and sure enough, here comes a late model Oldsmobile cruising on by his intersection, and there's an elderly couple in the front seat, and the man's driving, and he's obviously not wearing a shoulder harness. So the young police officer gets excited, thinks it's going to be a good day, throws on his lights, and he pulls the guy over. Can anyone relate to that panicky feeling of seeing police lights behind you? Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate that. So as the man's pulling over, he sees the lights, and he quickly remembers his seatbelt, and he clicks it on. See the conflict coming? So the young police officer gets out of his car. He walks up, trying to be appropriately authoritarian. He leans down in to the man's window and says, "Sir, a moment ago when you passed my car, you obviously were not wearing your seatbelt." The man looks back very disrespectfully at the young cop and says, "Sonny, you need to back off. Open your eyes. I'm wearing my seatbelt. Don't hassle me." The young cop takes a step back and thinks to himself, "What did they teach me in the academy? Somebody gives me a hard time, I need to make good eye contact, speak slowly and directly." He leans back and he says, "Sir, I have 20/15 vision. You were only 25 yards in front of my car when you passed. You obviously put your seatbelt on when you saw my lights. Please tell me the truth." The guy gets even more disrespectful. He says, "Sonny, you call me a liar. What's your badge number? What's your supervisor's name? I got enough of this." Now the young police officer is about to stress out himself. He thinks to himself, "I can't take an old man in on a resisting arrest charge my first day on the job," right? He thinks, "Oh no." He looks at the man's wife in the front seat next to him. He gets an idea. Now, this is a woman probably 75, 80 years old, hands neatly folded in her lap, blue hair. He thinks, "What the heck? Maybe she'll help me." So he leans in and he says, "Pardon me, ma'am, excuse me, but you look like an honest citizen. Please tell me the truth. This is really hard for me. When this man passed me a moment ago, was he wearing a seatbelt or wasn't he?" The woman leans down in a quiet voice and says, "Officer, in 20 years of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, the one thing I've learned for sure is when my husband's been drinking this much, I'm not going to argue with him." Is that okay, John?
Yeah, that is great.
Okay, good. All right. Let's spend the rest of our time talking about the 10 different areas that we'd identified earlier. So let's start first about handling tardiness, absenteeism, or sleeping on the job. And we've talked about a lot of this before already. And so just as a quick review, has there been anyone else in the room that's had an issue with any of these categories? Anybody? Any other examples you could share? Yeah. Could you share an example?
An employee that really, she works in ECU and really wants to be at Round Rock.
Okay.
Because that's where she lives.
Okay.
And yet, even though she's, been aiming for a transfer to the other location, it's still consistently late about 3 days out of 5.
Okay. Now have you handled that?
talked to her over and over again. I haven't gone further in the discussion with them because, you know, in all honesty, she's an elderly lady and constantly claiming medical issues.
Okay.
But she won't come clear on what they are.
Okay. I appreciate that very much. And so that's, we've got a note up here about if there appears to be a medical issue, definitely talk to Human Resources. I appreciate you giving that example. That's a good one, because a lot of times we hesitate to discipline something because we're not sure if there are underlying issues, right? So I appreciate that's a challenging one. I would definitely consult with HR or call the management consultant line, and we'll give you some support and some resources and ideas around that. Absolutely. Any other examples that anyone has had with this kind of a situation?
Well, I have student employees
Okay.
that obviously they were either up late partying or studying,
Right.
or, you know, those type of things. And they'll consistently, you know, show up, you know, not terribly late, but 5, 10 minutes or something
Yeah.
like that. And, you know, and they're good employees once they get there.
Yeah.
It's just that you kind of hope for them to actually be there on time because they're paid that way.
Right.
And
How do you typically handle that?
well, I take them into my office. I want to, you know, help them understand that they are a valuable member of this team and that we need everybody here, you know, on the field at the same time.
Good coach.
And typically that works. Usually once, you know, you have that conversation with them at work. I had one employee though who couldn't seem to catch on to this concept, and so I fired him. And he's like, "Well, you were serious." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm serious. This is an important thing. You know, you need to show up on time. It's part of being a good employee. You know, half of life is showing up.
Yeah.
You know, and it's important."
Yeah.
A semester later, he came back and goes, "I think I learned my lesson. You give me a second chance."
No kidding.
I hired him again.
Good for you.
And
I believe in second chance.
And
Good for
he
you.
has been a good employee. He shows up on time
That's
now.
awesome. What a great life lesson. You actually have probably set him up for success. It's glad that you learned that lesson now, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is his first job.
Okay. Because later in life, those lessons later in life can be even more painful when you've got a, you know, when you've got a family and then you're losing a job at that level when you're 30 with 2 small children, and a mortgage is a much more painful thing than. So I applaud you. That's great coaching. It really talks about this process perfectly, and I love the grace to give the guy another chance. That's super. What a great story. Okay, let's go to number 2. All right, productivity problems. We talked about this. We talked about this now in a couple of different ways. So it's really important, of course, that you communicate as a coach what your expectations are, and that's on us. Like John said, we need to look in the mirror. Before we get into discipline, into formal discipline, we need to look in the mirror. Have I done everything I can? Have I honestly clarified? Have I talked enough? Have I provided enough support? Do they have enough training? Do they have all the tools they need? That's on us. We need to make sure that that's there. And that's the philosophy here at ACCD, is we really want to make sure that we're talking growth and development first before we get into discipline. But if after that happens and you need to start getting into this disciplinary process, I like this bullet here, problem solve with the employee over possible solutions. I love getting employees engaged in the process. It's sort of like I'm trying to model for you guys today. I didn't want to come up here and lecture to you. I wanted to get you to participate. Have you ever noticed that people support what they help to create? Isn't this more motivating to be a part of it than rather just sit here and listen to me for 90 minutes? Yeah, exactly. Well, your employees are going to respond the same way. Is that if you sit down with them as you're coaching them, don't just tell them what they need to do. Ask them. So here's the issue, but I'd really like your input. What are some other ways we could address this? What do you think might be some alternative ways of dealing with this situation? Brainstorm. Get them to think about other possible solutions. Any other thoughts about coaching employees to be more productive? Yes, sir.
I think you use the word there, the modeling part is really important.
Yes.
You have to demonstrate that.
Yeah.
Kind of like before they'll do it, you got to show them that you'll do it.
That's right.
And then show them how you do it. Or like, I've only been here 6 months, and a lot of things that we've done down in duplication tend to change a little bit. And I did it first for a couple of months, and then the employees started picking up and changing their ways. So that we
That's a great point. There's an old saying, that's a really, really good point, Clifton. There's an old saying that says, what you were doing yelled so loudly in my ears I couldn't hear what you were saying. What we do modeling is so much more impactful than what we say. I mean, if we say one thing and do something different as supervisors, we can be seen as hypocrites. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're walking the talk. But if you expect certain performance, demonstrate it. Show them. That's great. I appreciate that very much. Okay. Okay, next we get into one of those violations that, I'm a little too trigger happy on this thing. Next we get into one of these violations that's a little bit more black and white. Okay, although there is some gray here, which we'll talk about. So how to handle cases of dishonesty or theft. Now, of course, oftentimes, particularly depending upon the seriousness of it, something like this can be grounds for immediate termination, right? It can be. And so, first and foremost, the policy at ACCD is if you have reasonable suspicion that someone's stolen something or they falsified something, it is a requirement for us to immediately contact the internal auditor's office. That's the entity within ACCD that investigates these kinds of things. So you do have to report that. I'd also concurrently let human resources know that this is going on. Of course, make sure your supervisor knows what's happening, because that's this is a serious offense that might result in someone losing their job, or serious. There could be, depending on what's been lost or falsified, there could be some real negative consequences, to many concerns. So you want to make sure you communicate to the right chain of command around you. But I love this. Terry's modeling here has been great about second chances. I love this. If you believe the circumstances warrant an employee being given another chance, I just personally witnessed with a small organization in Maryland where my office is. I work for Bureau of San Antonio, but I'm virtual. And so, but I've experienced with a small company what I thought was Employer of the Year is an employee was caught stealing, and there were some circumstances behind the scenes with this employee. The owner of the business gave the employee another chance, and could have fired him right on the spot, but was gracious and gave him another chance. And I believe in that. It's not always warranted, but in the circumstances where you believe it's warranted, go right to HR, talk to Dr. Tucker. If you think, yeah, this is serious, and sure, this is grounds for termination, but this person's going through a real financial hardship, and they just made a big error in judgment, and I don't want this to be on their record, and I really think that we could give them one more chance. Oftentimes, like EAP can be an option there too. I mean, Dr. Tucker will give you options, of course, from ACCD standpoint, but EAP can be an option. Dr. Tucker can mandate in counseling. And basically, that's part of the disciplinary process. And you guys know that, you guys through Dr. Tucker, because she has to be involved in all mandatory referrals, but you can actually mandate that employee as part of discipline get counseling to be able to identify what was going on, why it happened, hopefully come up with different ways of coping in the future that are more constructive. And then when the report comes back to Dr. Tucker that the employee satisfactorily completed treatment and is ready to get back to work in a constructive way. So, I mean, there are positive outcomes. It doesn't always have to be this is the end of the employment because the employee crossed the line. Or sometimes it will happen that way. But there are times when it's appropriate to do a second chance. Okay. Has anyone ever had a chance, an example of where this happened and you ended up giving an employee a second chance? Anybody?
I agree. My wife worked at the Capitol for like 25 years. And years ago, she had this young man that came in, just graduated from museum, and he was going to be an intern. First day of work, he showed up late, about an hour and a half late. And so my wife, you would have to know her to appreciate this, but being married to me, she's a real gentle soul. She started talking to this young man and kind of got upset with him because he showed up late the very first day of work.
Sure.
And starts crying. Well, fast forward several years, a couple of months ago, he got appointed as the commissioner of the Texas Commission on Environmental Control or something.
No kidding.
And he gave credit during his acceptance speech to my wife because the first day at work, she corrected this kid because he showed up late for work. And so he went on to bigger and better things.
Thank you, John. That's a great story. Folks, discipline is not punishment. Discipline is, let's go back to Terry's word of corrective. Our goal in disciplining people is to get them back on the right path. Okay, so if you look at your own attitude. If your goal in disciplining them is to get them out the door, that's not discipline. That is punitive. And sometimes that has to happen. Sometimes someone is messed up so much and just is not complying and refusing to comply that we have to show them the door, following the disciplinary process, no question. But our goal as supervisors, 99% of the cases really needs to be to correct it, to get them back on track. So I love hearing stories like that. It's wonderful. I'm going to move a little quicker now since we've covered a lot of these anecdotally along the way. All right, how to handle drug or alcohol-related problems. This is pretty straightforward here on campus. You all know it's a drug-free campus, right? It's a drug-free workplace. Okay, so there's no tolerance for drug or alcohol use. If you suspect drug or alcohol use, call campus police right away. I mean, that's the chain of command, and that's the report. Notify Dr. Tucker and Human Resources that this is going on, and then they will manage it. So they will assist you in managing. Campus police will investigate. They'll assist you in managing it. Again, Dr. Tucker may decide that the best way to handle this is to mandate the person to get treatment through the EAP or through other treatment sources. But that's pretty straightforward, right? So everyone's pretty comfortable with that process. Okay. All right, how to handle smoking cessation, another pretty direct process on campus. Everyone knows, right, ACCD is a non-smoking campus. And so again, there's a zero tolerance for smoking on campus. So all employees, of course, know about that, because they get it as part of orientation. If an employee is, they're a smoker and they might struggle with that kind of thing, refer them to the freedom from smoking courses. Contact HR, they'll tell you when those courses are. If anyone is smoking on campus, again, you want to contact campus police or the campus manager's office and just report it and let them handle it, so you stay out of the middle of that. That's a clear policy violation. And again, when you do that, I would also copy HR just to make sure that they're in the loop on that.
Just for question.
Yeah, sure.
On that one?
Yes.
You said about once you report to stay out of that, if you back to the model, part of me want to bring them in and say, this, I value you as part of my team.
Yeah.
I want to do work here, but break college policies.
Yeah.
You're going to jeopardize your employees here. So,
yeah.
It's in the process at this point.
Yeah.
I want you to get help in those things. So
I like that.
Coaching so much, partly be involved in this.
Yeah, still keep coaching. I'm not saying stay totally out of it. Keep coaching, keep encouraging. I just would stay out of the conversation about smoking. Because we need to keep that in, because the college has a process for that. But absolutely, encourage them to comply with the process that they're in, so that because you value them as a team member and you want them to continue to work here. Absolutely, I like that a lot. Yes, ma'am. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so if it's a direct report. Okay.
And someone reports to you that he's just smoking a cigarette, she doesn't report it to me. I'm going to say, her, there's just injuries and all that. So that's part of it.
Gotcha. Okay, does that help everybody? Good clarification, thank you. Okay, how to handle pranks and horseplay. Monique and I were talking about this on the drive up from San Antonio today. I was thinking in my experience, was there a situation, and I really could not think of an example in my own experience where I had to coach someone about, I was thinking maybe once in 12 years, someone told an inappropriate joke that was a little off color, that maybe I said that joke probably wasn't appropriate for a work environment, and then I think I talked to them a little bit about professionalism and what's appropriate for the workplace. Does anyone have an example of something where you had to coach someone or counsel someone because they were inappropriate and they're joking around? Or
Well, not so much joking around, but there are times when my employees have an opportunity to stand and talk amongst themselves while they're overseeing students working. They'll, of course, get off into conversations and, what they've seen in the news that day or whatever. And we have instances where they'll get off and start talking about politics, which is usually not an appropriate topic
great example.
because everybody, there's 13 people in a room.
It can be emotional.
There's 46 ideas about how the politics should be on it, right?
Yeah.
So, you constantly have to kind of remind people that this isn't your living room. This is a workplace. But you have to, but just that conversation in and of itself can be very, because people feel very passionate about their politics.
In Maryland too, so absolutely.
But yeah, and that's the kind of thing that I usually have issues with. It's not that people are forcing around or anything like that, but that their conversations amongst themselves will forget that they're standing in front of people that they shouldn't be having those kind of conversations with.
Right, good point. Or students.
And well, that's in my instance, it is students.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, that's a great point. Okay, next one, and I want to get you guys to lunch here in the next 3 minutes. So, how to handle sexual harassment complaints. This is another one that's pretty cut and dried. All sexual harassment complaints must be reported to the VP of HR, Dr. Tucker. Everyone should be pretty knowledgeable about the policy. And so, always, that's one of those where you want to always refer someone back to, because there's a real sensitivity there, and there can be legal concerns and that kind of stuff. So you always want to make sure that you stay focused on the policy. And reinforce as a supervisor that ACCD has an anti-harassment policy. We don't allow sexual harassment. We don't allow bullying. We don't allow any kind of harassment of employees as part of the culture here. And so, but then I would point them back to the policy and state that your discipline should again follow the policy. And because of the sensitivity of this nature, whenever something like that comes up, my first step would be you are coaching on an ongoing basis, but before disciplining, you definitely want to go to Dr. Tucker and report that and get some coaching for yourself as to how to approach that with the employee. Does that make sense? Okay. Next, how to defuse a weapon possessor. We've got John here, of course. We don't want to. My first suggestion is we don't want you to defuse. We don't want any of you that are not wearing a uniform like John to defuse a weapon possessor, right, John? That's something you just want to report. Now, some background information. You know that there's multiple reasons people bring weapons to work. In a lot of cases, it's benign. In a lot of cases, maybe they're a hunter and didn't think that it's in the truck. Okay, and someone notices there's a rifle in the back of this guy's truck in the parking lot. But if you see a weapon or you're aware of a weapon, someone has a weapon, you immediately call campus security, right, John? Immediately. I wouldn't confront that in any way, shape, or form. I mean, you don't try to be a hero. I wouldn't even talk to the person about it. Let's let the trained professionals handle that. I mean, again, it might be benign, but you got to take every situation seriously. So if you know someone has a weapon, I wouldn't even talk to the employee first. I'd go in my office, pick up the phone, and call campus police. Let them come and investigate. It could end up being not a big deal. Maybe it was an accident. Person didn't think that the gun was in the car, and they have a permit and everything else. But let's let the police handle that. Would you agree, John?
Great.
Okay. How to deal with the safety violator. I'm coming to the end here. Make sure that the employee understands what the safety expectations are in whatever the given area is. Okay, if it's not cleaning up workplace, leaving water on the floor, whatever the issue is, just make sure they understand. Coaching definitely, and safety issues coach. Make sure they clearly understand. Most people, if they know what the expectations are, sometimes people just aren't thinking. Like I noticed one of my coworkers left the light on the other day, and it was up to a cloth light. And so I caught that on the way out the door and thought, that's probably not a good idea to leave one of those lights that have the cloth around. Probably not a good idea to leave that on overnight because that can catch fire. That employee probably didn't give that a second thought. So, definitely wasn't intentional. So the next day you bring that employee in and you coach him a little bit. Do you realize that wasn't safe? And most times that takes care of it. But if there's someone that just is doing risky things, then you're going to have to discipline that. The EAP can be a support. If it's really risky or anything that you would consider a serious risk, I, again, will go to Dr. Tucker and say, here's the situation, and get some coaching. You can also call the management consultation line at EAP to get some coaching. All right, how to deal with insubordination. We talked about this earlier. Just to quickly summarize, and we're going to close. Make sure you get coaching because of the personal nature of those kinds of things. So we tend to take that personally. Make sure you get some objectivity from some of your peers. Before you sit down with that person. And again, the EAP and Dr. Tucker can be resources. Additional resources, we've talked about this a lot. So you all know now that the EAP provides unlimited management consultations. And one additional resource Dr. Tucker wanted us to remind you of is, does everyone know that there is mediation services available through Human Resources, which are great services, and the employee or the supervisor can request them. And so there's more things you can get to help.